Content over everything.
If you're left out of a story that you're actually included in it, it's disempowering. You don't know your history. You can't provide examples of what your ancestors actually did when people tell you that you didn't do nothing. And it's, like I said, it's disempowering. And when people find out about this information, they find it empowering, they find it interesting, they find it very stimulating, and they walk out of the room feeling, better than when they came in. And also, if they have the argument or discussion with someone who doesn't know their history, they can actually say, well, look, if you don't think there were black people in World War II, well, check out this guy, check out that guy, check out, John Henry Smythe or Errol Barrow or whatever. So when these events take place, you see people literally taking notes, writing things down. They go off and do their own research, and then it really kind of awakens them as to how misinformed mainstream society is and how kind of unfair it is as well. So it says here, the French army had been defeated, explains director Rachid Boucheret, and most of their former soldiers were in prisoner of war camps or hiding or working in civilian life. So in 1943, the exiled General de Gaulle, by then based in Algiers, which is in Africa of course, had to build what he referred to as his African army. That's what it says there, right? This army was composed of just 200,000 white Frenchmen alongside 400,000 Algerians and Africans who first entered Europe through Italy and then moved into France. Therefore, the French army that liberated France was not French, it was over 65% African. But there's more. So this is an interview from the BBC, April 6, 2009. Listen to what they say here.
The liberation of Paris in August 1944 was a great moment in the long fight against Nazi Germany. But what is not widely known is that in this victory against a racist ideology, British and American commanders deliberately excluded black French soldiers from taking part in the liberation. Papers have come to light which show that colonial troops, mainly from West Africa, formed a large part of the Free French forces, but it was a whites-only force that marched into the city. Mike Thompson has seen the papers for Radio 4's Document programme.
As the threat of war with Germany grew, tens of thousands of troops from France's West African colonies answered the call. By the time the country fell in June 1940, 17,000 of them lay dead, many ruthlessly executed after surrendering to German forces.
After capturing us, the Germans treated the Senegalese with unprecedented brutality. They stabbed them with their bayonets and beat them with belt buckles. A little later we heard rapid salvos from an automatic weapon coming from the direction where they had disappeared.
Soon after France's crushing defeat, General de Gaulle called on all the country's soldiers, sailors and airmen to rejoin the fight. Thousands of black colonial troops did just that, and they soon made up the core of the Free French force. The French 2nd Armoured Division, which until then had many colonial troops in its ranks, led the Allied liberation of Paris on August the 25th, 1944. But strangely, looking through archive footage, I can't see a single black soldier amongst them. Professor Olivier Vivioka at the École Normale Supérieure de Cachin knows why.
You cannot see black faces because black soldiers were not allowed to participate to the liberation of Paris.
The evidence for this can be found in a document from Allied High Command, written by American officer Major General Walter Bedell Smith. Stamped confidential, it reads,
It is most desirable that the division mentioned above consist of white personnel, and this would indicate the 2nd Armoured Division, which with only 1/4 native personnel is the only French division operationally available that could be made 100% white.
The American High Command, which segregated its own soldiers along racial lines and didn't allow most black GIs to fight until near the end of the war, clearly wanted the liberation to be seen as a whites-only victory. De Gaulle went along with the idea after assurances that French forces would lead the liberation. But surely Britain, which didn't segregate its soldiers and had a large and highly valued Indian army, must have objected. Not a bit of it. This document was written in January 1944 by British General Frederick Morgan to the Allied Supreme Commander.
I have told Colonel de Chevine that his chances of getting what he wants will be vastly improved if he can produce a white infantry division.
Just 2 years earlier, concern about the arrival of 100,000 black GIs in Britain led Major General Arnold Bullet Dowler to submit a paper entitled Notes on Relations with Coloured People to the British Cabinet. It included this passage.
While there are many coloured men of high mentality and cultural distinction, the generality are of a simple mental outlook. Too much freedom and too wide association with white men tend to make them lose their heads.
The British Cabinet accepted most of what Dowler had to say, and the Army later advised its soldiers not to invite black GIs home or back to their barracks. After the liberation of Paris, many of France's black colonial soldiers were stripped of their uniforms and sent home. And in 1959, their pensions were cut.
The liberation of Paris.
Alright, so just to summarize, up to 2/3 of the French army was actually African, from Africa itself. They fought all the way to Paris. When they get to Paris now, they're not allowed to march at the front of the parade, they get sent to the back. So when the cameras are rolling, they record the white troops. So if you watch these old documentaries, you see a whole bunch of white guys, you might think it was all white, but that's not true at all. And that was deliberately conspired to be the case with the British and the French and the Americans to actually ignore the black contribution to winning the war. So they literally couldn't have won the war without these African troops, but when it comes to recording history, it's like, oh well, we did it all by ourselves, in a nutshell. When you don't get the credit for something you've done, you feel a certain way, right? But not only that, it's like your ancestors wouldn't know that you did what you actually did. So it disempowers them as well. And that's deliberate. It's not an accident that all this history is not that well known, you know, or that people refuse to teach it. It's a way of maintaining white supremacy. Same thing happens in America in that you have a whole bunch of black guys who fight for America. Once the war is over now, they're either not referred to in history, or when it comes to make a movie about them, they're not in the movie. There's a film called Flags of Our Fathers by Clint Eastwood. And again, the black soldiers who were actually in that part of the war effort during the war complained bitterly that when Clint Eastwood made his film, they don't actually refer to the black troops who actually were in that particular part of the war. Easy question. What's the answer, please? No?
American RF.
Yeah, Red Tails. That's their nickname. They're called the Red Tails. So they were the best fighter squadron in World War II. They flew missions over Germany. They were specifically, in fact, why am I talking? Let me just show you here. Let me just show you. But as far as the film is concerned, there was no film until 2012. And George Lucas spent about 30 years trying to get this film made. He went to every single studio in Hollywood to ask them to help him make the film. And they all told him no. They all told him no, right? And then he said, okay, you know, I'm a billionaire, so I can actually make the film myself. So he actually then makes the film. Then he goes back to Hollywood and asks them to distribute the film, to put it out around the world. And they tell him no again. And they tell him that they can't do it because they don't think there's any money in a black film about black pilots. And they wouldn't know how to market such a film anyhow. So they say they don't know how to market a film of all black cast. That's what they say, right? So George Lucas, being a billionaire, says, okay, you know what, I'll put it out by myself. So he spends about $90 million, whatever it is, to make the film and put it out around the world. And that's the film Red Tails. It comes out in America, it's #1 in the box office. Let me just show you a little piece of it. So, basics there are true. The Americans were suffering heavy losses because their fighter escort wasn't up to the job. They went to the all-black Tuskegee Airmen, did a fantastic job and delivered the bombers to their target and protect them there on the way back. Amazing job, which no one else was doing but them, right? Once the war is over now, you find that the same guys who were heroes during the war, in fact, let me go back a bit. During the war, all the heroics of all the black soldiers in World War II who were American were not covered by the press. There was an embargo. So all the stuff they were doing that was amazing and fantastic was not reported back in America at all. So people during the war didn't know these things were going on. But other than that, when these guys get back from the war now, they're qualified pilots, guess what? Can't get no job because they're black. And this is 20 years before you have the civil rights activities of Martin Luther King. The war ends in 1945, Luther King comes from in 1955 and 65, etc. with the Montgomery bus boycott. So these guys, having fought for their country, when they get back home, they think, you know, this is not right. Let's get involved in the fight for equality. So that's another story that's not known. But let me just show you Mr. Lucas himself. You know George Lucas made Star Wars, Indiana Jones, etc. This is him being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. Listen to what he says about how hard it was to get that film made.
The Airmen, how hard is it to get the studios buy-in for that?
Well, we took it to all the studios, every single one of them, and nobody wanted it. Not one studio said, we'll do this movie. They all said, well, we don't know how to market this movie. It was all paid for, and it's not even that expensive. But it looks like a big movie. It's a real professional movie. It's got movie stars in it. It's got everything in it, and nobody wanted it.
Big producer like George Lucas went to 7 different studios. They all told him no because it's a black film, or it's a black film, a certain type of black film. And they said that the same old thing about it wouldn't sell overseas. Now the fact is, of course, Black Panther sold overseas, but before Black Panther, remember there's a movie called Blade, B-L-A-D, Blade? Wesley Snipes. Each of his films made $100 million overseas. Before him, you had a couple of guys called Jim Brown and Sidney Poitier, who made money overseas. So that is a complete nonsense. But let me just show you a comparison so we can kind of see what's going on here. Because why would you not want to make a movie that's a true story about all these kind of amazing African-American pilots? That's a true story about World War II. So remember they said they didn't have to market a black movie overseas, they could make money from a black movie overseas? Did you ever hear or see a movie called Big Mama's House? 1, 2, and 3? Not just 1, 2, and 3. And then Get Rich or Die Trying was about drug dealings and bombing and not bombing, shootings in some sort of so-called getaway area. So there's no problem making them kind of movies overseas on a regular basis, but when it comes to this kind of movie, a true story by the way, nah, we're not interested, can't do it, no funding, So think about why that's the case. It's not taught in school, so even though World War II is on a curriculum at primary school and secondary school, you go to any school and the images I'm talking on showing people today are not in the school classroom, in the textbooks. So it's part of British history, it's part of World War II's history, it's there, it's evidence, it's factual, so it should be much, much better known. And I feel it's disservice to the men and women who fought and served this country that their stories are not better known, so that's why I put these events on. So we're going to go to the Caribbean now, because the Caribbean is a major part of World War II. About the Caribbean, Britain can't know, let me show you what I'm talking about. Some of these islands were British colonies at the time of the war. Some were Dutch colonies, some were French colonies, some were American kind of outposts. So let's get into this history in the Caribbean now. England allows America to build air and sea bases all over the Caribbean on 99-year leases in return for 50 old US destroyers. And of course, apart from that now, you've got oil coming from the Caribbean. Anybody from Trinidad? Is there oil in Trinidad even now? Yes, there is, a whole bunch of it. Would oil be relevant or important to the war effort? Let's find out. Listen to what they say about the importance of the Caribbean.
U.S. Army bombers loading up for patrol duty over the Caribbean. Bombers guarding the supply lanes of the West Indies. Guarding the oil tankers bringing the black gold from the Americas to the United Nations. Aruba, the world's largest refineries, are protected by the Dutch and by the Americans. Refineries of one field alone producing more oil than any controlled by the Axis. Today, U.S. reinforcements are guarding foot of these vital West Indies, for this was the scene of the first attack on the Western Hemisphere. An attack made by a lone submarine, soon blasted from the water by the guns and bombs of the protecting forces.
This is the most powerful black man in World War II. I don't expect someone to recognize him. His name is Felix Eboué. Well, as it says here, he was a key figure in World War II, but for his statesmanship in Africa, the force of Hitler Mussolini might have succeeded in breaking through the Allied line at El Alamein. So, who is this guy? How is he relevant? What's his story? At the time of the war, Felix Eboué was governor of this area here, right? He controlled all of that area. Now, he was in charge. So, as you know, the French would take number of the Germans. So once the Germans took over the French, right, he could decide to go with the Germans or with the British or the French. So he chose to go with the British and the French. And he used his power and his influence to make sure that this part of the world was accessible to British and American forces. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. So during the war, this was a secret. The West African Area Enforcement Bridge was a secret during the war. Because basically, we, in England here, we get supplied from America with aircraft like this, but they'd be put into these boxes, into kit boxes. They would then sail them in kit boxes from North America across to Africa, or sometimes to Europe itself, right? And then assemble the aircraft, and then fly the aircraft to the next destination. Can you tell me of any black person in England who's been given a state funeral here? I don't think you can, because it's never happened. In France, they gave Felix Eboué, the same black guy I'm talking about, a state funeral. These flags represent East Africa. We're talking about Somalia, Somaliland, and Djibouti, because you also had. Check this out. See if you recognize anybody.
Well, this weekend, the Imperial War Museum will be hosting the Black Poppies Film Festival, celebrating their achievements. The growing success of the festival is largely due to the hard work of one man, the amateur historian Tony Warner, and Errol Murray went off to meet him.
It was one of these types of planes which carried out the Dam Busters raid and were also used on missions of...
Tony Warner has worked hard to publicise the contribution of ethnic minorities in the services. That's people like Alan Wilmot, a World War II veteran who at just 16 signed up for the Royal Navy.
Buzzbomb, that was it, yeah.
Buzzbomb. At first, you know, it was a case of they know nothing about us. Because if they said where you're from, and we said Jamaica, they said what part of Africa is that? And they want to know where we learn to speak English and questions like that.
People don't know that there was something like 2.5 million Indian troops in the Second World War.
Marking the positions of every building and landmark of the world.
They don't know that something like 5,000 RAF personnel who came from the Caribbean who sort of fought for Queen of Country. So these are all things that people should know. It's part of British history. It's not just relegated to black or Asian people or Chinese people. It's part of the whole history of the country. And if it wasn't for their contributions, then the war might end up with a different outcome.
How many Indian, or Asian I should say, troops fought in World War II, did I say?
2.5 million.
2.5 million. 2.5 million Indian. When I say India, I'm talking about Pakistan, Bangladesh, India itself. I'm talking about 6 Muslim Hindus left their yard, left the area, came across here to fight Britain. They fought in Monte Cassino, they fought in Italy, they fought in Africa, they fought in Burma, Malaysia. They fought all over the world for Britain. And my question to you is, how do you win a war without 2.5 million troops? Or would it be possible to win a war without 2.5 million troops? And if that's the case, then when's the last time you've been to see a World War II movie and seen a whole bunch of Indian guys charging the hill, getting a girl, saving the day, winning the war, because that's what they actually did in real life. So how come that representation is not shown there? When you think about World War II in schools, primary school, secondary school, you do not see a whole bunch of Indian images in the textbooks. For some reason, even though, of course, 2.5 million of them literally served for their country. So why is that recognition not a bit more kind of obvious and apparent and embedded in the curriculum? How come it's not there? East Africans involved in World War II. These are some of them. Farah Ibrahim Adilahi was from what we call Somalia now. Check his medals. So he left Somalia and came across here to fight during the war. Ibrahim Dwali Mohammed was in the infantry and went in with the invasion. We went in on the Juno Beach, seen some of the toughest fighting. I was captured after a few days. I still suffer from frostbite because of it. I ended up in Germany instead of being in Hill. I ended up in Germany instead of being in Hill. Then I was transferred to Ozma to be an officer's camp in Hell. Then we were liberated by the Yanks, the Americans, the Russians. Never Somali. This kid's a sailor. His medals. Used to live down in Newport. This kid's still there. Never Somali guy. And there was a place called West Indies House, Sailors Hostel. So there were lots of Africans in the Merchant Navy helping Britain fight the war. As far as the war is concerned, for example, let's look at flying a plane. To fly a plane costs a lot of money. So an easy way to fly a plane is to join the Air Force, and that way you get the training for free and you get to fly for free as well. And for black people at that time, remember, they were literally told, you can't do this, you're incompetent, you're inferior. So for some of them, it was like to prove a point. Some was to be adventurous. Some was to actually have a potential career in the future. So for all those different reasons, once they got in, then they would use their expertise to become the best in effect, right? And once they became the best, then there was no holding them back, because, you know, if they did have any internalized stereotypes, once they got in there and did the thing, then it just proved that those stereotypes were a load of nonsense. And it also proved that these people were lying to them for the last 20, 30 years or so. On the screen you can see the 761 Tank Battalion. There was an all-black tank battalion in World War II, which was the best tank battalion in World War II, as far as I'm concerned anyway. So look at here. Allies closing right wing, Negro tankers cut path for the Third Army. If you're cutting a path for an army, where are you? Front or back? Front. They're at the front line. They're in the vanguard, right? Down here it says lone Negro crew held 16 German tanks at bay. So one tank full of black guys is holding off 16 other tanks, German tanks, right? That shows you how good these guys would have been. So the 761 was in World War II. And just out of interest, can you, what animal would you
Black
say?
Panther.
It's a Panther, right? Because guess what? They were called the Black Panther tank battalion during World War II. Check this out.
At Bastogne, surrounded by Germans, the 101st Airborne fights for survival. To relieve the 101st, Patton rushes elements of his 3rd Army north. Serving in support, the 761st blasts its way from the Saar River on December 24th, north to Neufchâteau, Belgium, where they arrive on the 30th.
We were truly nervous in Bastogne because behind every tree there was a dead soldier. Enemy or yours?
There were groups of American GIs massacred by the Camp Group Piper. 11 black soldiers from the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion. When the bodies were recovered and it was discovered that they had been mutilated, they had bashed some of their skulls in with rifle butts, gouged their eyes out with bayonets.
We never fought as one unit all together. They just split us all over the place. And I think that even confused the Germans, because I guess anywhere they looked, they saw black tankers. I guess they thought it was a whole bunch of us. We only were about 700 of us, see? But they didn't know that.
We had the speed and the 360-degree traversing of the turrets, which the German tanks, they had to turn the whole tank to operate or fire on you. We could be traveling across 30, 35 miles an hour, and that turret was revolving 360 degrees, so you just keep firing as you go. That's just how we were able to either outflank them.
Movie that gives you a flavor for what tank warfare was like. There's a film starring Brad Pitt. It's called Fury, F-U-R-I, Fury. There's no black people in it, but it gives an idea as to what it was like. But that particular battalion was heavily used, and what they complained about is that they'd have white tank battalions that would be rested. So every couple of months you have a rest. They would complain, the black guys would say that they've never gotten a rest, and in fact, what they'll say this is a whole hour-long documentary, this thing here, right? It's not hour-long. Basically, they would say that they would send in the white guys couldn't do the job, they'd then call them in, right? And then they'd give the white guys a rest. Meanwhile, another problem come up, and they send the black guys there again. So they use them over and over again without giving them any kind of rest, which is why they got heavier casualties than the other white units. But they were the best tank battalion in World War II. As I said before, when they were doing their thing, they were not reported upon. They never got back to the mainstream back in America. And once war was over, people didn't even know about it. But maybe George Lucas might make a film about this too. Although I should say that, you see that film Red Tails? George Lucas planned to make a trilogy. You know he likes to make trilogies. He planned to make 3 films about Red Tails. And the one that you saw was the middle one. The first one's going to be about the training they went through. The second was about the war itself. And the third was going to be about how they got involved in civil rights when they got back home. But because he had so much problems, he just left it. So this is what happens when you come across institutional racism. Book on the Black Panther Tank Battalion, there you go, by Gina M. DiNicolo. Black Panther is a story of race, war, and courage. So don't get confused, you know. The Black Panther comic book comes out in the 60s. This is 1940s we're talking about. So the idea of a Black Panther being used to represent black courage and power goes back to World War II. Not 1966, World War II. This is the evidence right here. And all that happens is that some of the guys who are involved in the Black Panther tank battalion, when they got back home, their sons, or maybe them themselves, would still use that emblem to kind of empower themselves. And that's basically the origin of the Black Panther whole story. The question is, what's the odd one out? And the answer is that one. But the animal is a Black Panther. You can see the rise of Black Panther, and this is what you call a parachute. Well, guess what? During World War II, there was an all-black parachute unit called the 555 or triple nickels. Americans call 5 cent pieces of nickel, right? Their nickname was the triple nickels, and they were all black parachutists, and they had the Black Panther as their symbol too, for some reason. The book is here. Courage Has No Color: The True Story of the Triple Nickels, by Tonya Lee Stone. Cool. Here's the thing though, right? These guys were trained parachutists, elite troops, right? Their nickname, apart from being triple was the smoke jumpers. Why? Because these guys were trained, and their job was they were used to fight fires in California. So during World War II, if a fire broke out, these guys would jump out of the aircraft in silk parachutes into forest fires to put the forest fires out. Did you hear what I just said? Right? That's what they were doing during the war, right? So you can imagine how brave you're going to be to jump out of a plane into a fire and then put it out, but that's what they're doing the job for. They didn't get a chance to see action because the powers that be didn't want to have them fighting. That's not a long story. So the history goes back. It's not just a comic book movie, it goes back to World War II. And these guys are using that symbol to represent themselves for some reason. Interesting point is that there were lots of heroic African Americans, Black British, etc. during the war. What you find is that they even didn't get no medals during the war, or they had to wait until 1997 to get an award. So in America, some of the guys I've mentioned or referred to here, even though they did feats of bravery during the war that ended in 1945, it's not until 1997 they get the medals for what they've done in 1945. Right? That's the case. Have a good think about that. That's when you hear stuff like, you didn't do nothing in the war, which I've heard myself, and it's like, you really don't know history. So the impact it has on I suppose, the majority population or mainstream population is that they don't appreciate the massive contribution of African people, in a nutshell.
So would you say there's some responsibility on our hand, or would you feel like it's within our interests to make sure that not only us are aware of what we've contributed in the history, but also other people that we're living amongst?
Yeah, but like, for example, this event today was free. It's at the National Maritime Museum, which is a very white organization, you know. And who's in the audience? It's like the emphasis is on people to, like Marcus Garvey would say, do for self. So Marcus Garvey said, do for self. We've done for self, and people can opt in if they want to. If they don't want to opt in, then that's up to them. But like I said, this event was free today, and you saw who turned up for it. So that's worth thinking about.